IKEA furniture. I know I'm probably the one person in this room who likes to assemble IKEA furniture, but I think I'm actually kind of good at it. It takes me a while, but I like that in the first go at it, I tend to get it all right. I pay real close attention. I'm looking at every angle of it. I take my time with it. And so Hannah loves when I put together the furniture. And typically the manual is very technical, and typically the manual will tell you exactly how it's done. And it's helpful that way. The only thing is we're getting stuff in for the baby, and a friend of ours dropped off a stroller that needed to be assembled, and the manual for the stroller was nothing like the stroller itself. It was like, I look at the picture and I'm like, that is not what I'm looking at here. And it took me forever. I've spent 30 minutes just staring at step number 1. It took me forever because the manual wasn't as technical as I wanted it to be. It didn't match what I saw in reality. Okay? When we read Genesis 1 and we read about the cosmic universe according to the Bible, we might experience that same sort of frustration. In the last few weeks and even months as we've been surveying Genesis 1, and we've been talking about the Rakia, the sky dome, and we've been talking about all these different elements. We talk about the chaos waters. And we talk about how there's the heavens are really what's up there. The land isn't a globe. When it talks about earth, they're not thinking in terms of a globe. They're thinking in terms of just what's down here. And we think this isn't as technical as I would have wanted it to be. Because if it weren't super technical, we'd have some real questions. Like, did we not send people up to the moon? Because if we did, how did they get past the Rakia? How did that happen? Or if there's the waters above and the waters below, at what point do these waters, do they meet? At what point? Can we find that meeting place? If we went out into the ocean far enough, would we find a place where there's just like water and this glass dome? No, we wouldn't find it. And so what do we do with the Bible when so much of it doesn't fit our technical senses? It's not a very good IKEA manual. But the good thing is, that's not the purpose of the Bible. We're not reading the Bible to put together furniture. We're not reading the Bible like a carpenter would be reading instructions, or like a construction worker might be reading blueprints. There's something else that the Bible is trying to do with us. It's less, we've made this distinction. Maybe it's less about the physical material universe and more about what is the worldview. Something that's even more important than just knowing some of the details about things or some of the science about it. A lot of what especially the creation story is really telling us, who is God? How should we see God? And how should we understand ourselves? And how should we understand humanity in relationship to God and in relationship to the rest of creation? It's answering questions of the why nature, maybe more than the questions of the how nature. And I thought this was important to remind ourselves of as we keep moving forward. Because the last 2 weeks we've talked about the waters, we talked about the great sea creature, and how God is not only the tamer of the chaos waters, but he's also the dragon slayer. And how the Bible will explain God, will picture God as the one who has in the past slayed dragons, but we still anticipate a day where God will once and for all slay that dragon. And we saw that the dragon represents the most chaotic source of darkness and evil, and God will win. God will destroy all chaos and death once and for all. We wait that day. but it's in these different pictures. So today we're going to do some more of that. Today we're talking about the land. The land. Which, remember, when you read in the Bible, the word earth is the same word. Eretz is the same word as land. But then there's another word in the Hebrew that when you see dry land or dry ground, that's just dry, and that's a different word, okay? So, but when we talk about the land or the earth, it's the same thing. We're going to talk about that. And so let's start off with Genesis 1. Let's just kind of get familiarized again with day 3. So this is Genesis 1, verse 11. It says, we'll start at 9, sorry. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. Okay, so some things we notice, we talk about this whole story as the creation story, and so many times when we think of creation, we think God bringing about things out of nothing. But the way that it's phrased here is not that God created the land out of nothing. That's not the picture that's given. In fact, it's kind of weird. It's not the way I would have written it. If I were to be writing the Bible, it says he gathered the waters into one place. So that's kind of interesting. If you look at a map, if you look at the globe, I kind of see the waters kind of spread out in lots of places. But the waters were gathered into one place, and then the land appeared. The land just appeared. The waters are gathered, and the land appears. This is how it says. But when I picture it, I'm imagining the land sort of being elevated up and rising above the waters, and then the waters kind of receding down. That's the picture I get. But what it says here is the waters were gathered to one place, and the dry land appeared. Just kind of interesting. Kind of tough to even picture. Tough to imagine how that really works with what we know of the oceans and everything. And it was so, God called the dry land earth, Eretz, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Okay, so we've got the land. And as we've been exploring Genesis 1, we're seeing how days 1, 2, and 3, God is creating order. He's putting in these environments that are going to be friendly to human beings and to the rest of creation. And so land really matters. If you've got the chaos waters, you really need somewhere for us to plant our feet. And so this is a really important day. Day 3 really matters. We need that land. Now, let's just use our imagination here. Let's think about this land. The land is on top of the waters. So, if the land is sitting on top of the waters, so the waters are around the land and the waters are under the land. We know that if you dig and dig and dig, you're going to get molten rock. You're going to get magma. But what did the ancient people know if you dug and dug and dug? A lot of times you're going to get a spring water. That's where you get your wells from, is you're going to get water. So you imagine the land is above the waters. Now, in what way is the land above the waters? What is holding the land up? There's only two options I can think of. Is either the land is a boat, it's got enough buoyancy to float, or there's some sort of structure within the waters holding the land up. And the Bible tells us which one it is. So of course, I'm going to have us make a guess before I give the answer. If you think it's a boat, raise your hand. If you think it's some sort of structure, raise your hand. What's that?
A turtle.
A turtle. Yeah, we're on the back of the turtle. Oh, that sounds familiar. It actually is. It's some sort of structure. So if you read, there's a couple parts of the Bible that talk about the pillars that the land is founded on. So I think it's Psalm 104, maybe Psalm 24 as well. But one psalm in particular I want to go to that tells us a little more is Psalm 75. Psalm 75 we're going to actually turn to. So as we imagine the land on top of pillars, what we really want to know is not the technical stuff. We're not trying to read the Bible to know how to assemble an earth of our own. We're reading the Bible to understand what is it saying about us and about God, and what does this mean about our relationship, and what we should think of God. And so Psalm 75, starting in verse 1. We give thanks to you, O God. We give thanks, for your name is near. We recount your wondrous deeds. What are those deeds? At the set time that I appoint, I will judge with equity. Notice that in verse 1, we're talking to God. In verse 2, it's God speaking. And he says, at the set time that I appoint, I will judge with equity. Okay, so he's going to judge with equity. He promises, I'm going to judge with fairness, impartiality. I'm going to judge with righteousness. God is going to judge. Now, why would God have to tell people that judgment is coming? Maybe it's a warning, but a lot of times in the Bible, judgment is actually something people anticipate. A lot of times in the Bible, judgment is a promise that people are looking forward to, which is kind of weird in our minds. Typically, we see that as something we don't like talking about. It kind of embarrasses us as Christians to the rest of the world to see a judgmental God. But to the psalmist, oftentimes they're in an oppressive situation where the wicked people just seem to be getting along just fine without any consequences. And they're waiting for God to set things straight. And so God promises he'll do it at an appointed time. At the time he chooses, he says, I'm going to judge with equity. It will happen. Verse 3, when the earth totters, when the land shakes and all its inhabitants, it is I who keep steady its pillars. I keep things steady. So what does one thing have to do with another? I think what's going on is it's the psalmist in a situation where the wicked are doing well, where chaos is unleashed, and they're praying to God. They're saying, God, when will you judge? When will you set things right? God says, at an appointed time. And I think this next verse, how does verse 2 and 3 connect? Where he says, I'm going to judge at a certain time. And then verse 3, he says, when the land is tottering, when the earth is shaking, I'm upholding the pillars. I keep the pillars steady. I wonder if he's saying, in the meantime, while chaos is unleashed, while it seems like everybody in the land is shaking, he says, I am still holding on. In the unknown, in the invisible places, the places that really matter, the thing that's really holding it all together, I'm keeping steady. I don't know about you, but that's such a beautiful picture to me. While above the land, where we are, we see things are shaking and it's chaos, and we think, where is the order? Who's going to set things right? And God says, I will come and judge. I will set it right, but in the meantime, don't think that I've let go of the pillars. What does that say about the world that God created? I don't know. You know, I read through Genesis 1 and I think, okay, God made it all, and we can imagine a world where he just kind of leaves it to the rest of us to go on with. A lot of our forefathers in America were deists. And the belief was that God set everything in motion and then he stepped away. Like we don't see God active. And that just seems to go against so much of what the Bible is saying here. Is that when it doesn't seem like God's doing anything, he's holding on to them pillars underneath us. He's keeping the land in place. He's keeping us from sinking down into the great sea waters. He's doing it. He's upholding it, constantly upholding it. When we think of the pillars, we can think of God's hand there. When we think of the way God created the world, he didn't create a world that would be okay without him. He created the world with a rakia holding up the waters. But at any time, those waters could cave in, just like Noah's flood. And so he needs to keep and uphold the rakia up there. At any time, the land could sink into the sea, but he's the one holding on to those pillars. At any time, that dragon, that sea dragon, could leave its boundaries and cause chaos where we are, but it's God who is taming the dragon. It's like he created a world in which he needs to be there to keep everything okay. Because if he ever stopped, things are going to collapse into chaos. It's a good world. He created it good. He said so over and over and over again. It's good, it's good, it's good. But it's still dependent on God holding things together. So that's the first thing I want you to think of when you think of the land, is that it's sitting on top of pillars. But another thing we can think of when we think of this land and how the Bible describes it is that there is a circle drawn around it. And there are clear boundaries between the land and the sea. Let's go to Proverbs now. Proverbs 8. This is super fascinating here. We're going to hear from a new character, maybe a character in the Bible you didn't know about. Starting in verse 22. Proverbs 8, 22. It's the story of creation told from the view of Lady Wisdom. Wisdom personified is speaking. And she says, "The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old." Verse 23, "Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth." Pre-creation, there was wisdom. "When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. Before he had made the land, the earth, with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, the skies, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep," drew a circle, said, "This is where the land will be. Here's the circle." Some people got really excited about this idea of a circle, that they thought, oh, look, the Bible was talking about how the earth is in a sphere. And they didn't think of the earth as a flat earth. See, the Bible is way ahead of its time. And I think that was getting really excited, but you're kind of missing some of what they're trying to say here. The point isn't necessarily to say that the earth is a globe, because that's not even what they think of when they think of earth. They think of the land, the ground that we stand on. We'll keep going, 28. "When he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep. When he assigned to the sea its," my version says limit. We're going to learn a new Hebrew word. How about that? Everybody say chok. There you go. Clear your throat there. Chok. One more time. Hulk. When he assigned the seas in its hulk, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was beside him. Who was beside him? Wisdom. Like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world and delighting in the children of man. Isn't that cool? What a cool picture of the creation story. Wisdom side by side with God as these things are coming into being. But verse 29 again, when he assigned the sea its hulk. Okay, we see the word hulk first in the story of Joseph. Joseph, we know that he was sold into slavery, he was brought into Egypt. He ended through a series of coincidences. He rises to power till he is managing one of the biggest crises the world had seen, this great famine, and he has prepared Egypt for it. He's in second command only to Pharaoh himself, and this is in the middle of the famine, and things aren't looking good for Egypt and Canaan. And both of them are coming up to Joseph, and they say, we're out of food, what can we do? They just start selling him all their stuff for food. Joseph, in the process of all this, is making Pharaoh enormously wealthy. And then they come back again, and they said, we gave you everything we have. What more can we do? And he said, okay, here's the deal we're going to make. You're going to sell yourselves to Pharaoh. You're going to sell yourselves to Pharaoh, and you're going to promise from here on out 1/5 of everything your land produces is going to go to Pharaoh. Okay? So Pharaoh is building an empire here. There are people suffering. I don't know. There might be some more we can look there, but I want to point out one thing is they say everybody does it, everybody agrees to this except for one group of people, Pharaoh's priests. Pharaoh's priests don't have to do that because they had already made an arrangement that they would give an allotment to Pharaoh, or that there was an allotment already arranged, either one way or the other, of 1/5. And the word allotment is the first time we see the word hulk, an allotment. An allotment, like a portion of what you've got allotted to somebody else. And then what's interesting is that's at the end of Genesis, we see hulk, and just a couple verses later we see it again, but it's being used in a different way. He kind of repeats the whole arrangement and says this is going to be a hulk for the people. Like, okay, they're going to have to do this every single time. This is the arrangement and all that. So now hulk doesn't mean allotment. It meant the new arrangement of things. Maybe a statute. And then you read the rest of the Torah, the rest of the 5 books of Moses, and the word hulk just shows up constantly as the word statutes, the rule, the command. This is the way things are to be. And I just think that's so interesting. So we get this thing that there's a word that can be applied to meaning an allotment, what's given over, and a word that means statute. And then we see it applied here in reference to the sea. When he assigned the sea its hulk, its allotment, its statute. I just, like the sea in the ancient Near East was a god of its own. And it was a scary god. It was a rival to the other gods. You had to worry about what would the sea god do to you. You had to respect the sea god. And yet here's Yahweh from the beginning saying, here's your allowance. I find that fascinating. Here's your allotment. You're giving. You're given this boundary. And so when we look at the coast, when we're ever on a beach, when we ever see a coast, whenever we see a big body of water, we can imagine the arrangement God made with the waters, the chaos waters that could kill us, saying, this is how far you go. No more. And it says, so that the waters might not transgress his command. The sea, the great sea, the chaos waters are in obedience to Yahweh. This is one of the best pictures we can get of God's rule over the world. I love this. You know, both these pictures, the pillars and the hulk, the pillars and the shores. You know what they do for me? You know, my entire life, I've heard that God is in control. I've heard it so many times. And I believe it. I do. But there's something to hearing it said in a new, fresh way. You know, and the Bible doesn't just stick with the same wording all the time. The Bible has all these fresh ways to say something that gives us deeper meaning. And so we could say, yeah, God's in control. Sure. We said it before. You've told someone that. You've heard it a million times. Yes, God's in control. But there is something that really speaks to my soul when I don't just hear God's in control, but when I hear He is the one upholding the pillars beneath us. There's an emotion there. There's something really there. While everything above is in chaos, He's holding on to those pillars. There's something too saying that God is the one who commands the seas and sets limits on how far the waters can go. That one of our greatest threats to us is still in obedience to God's word. There's a power to this imagery that speaks to the depth. It's the same thing. God's in control, but it's a different way to say it. I would just point out one more thing about the land. One more thing. We're going to go to Genesis 8. Genesis 8. This is the story of the flood. Genesis 8, starting in verse 1. I want to read some of these things for us as we wrap up. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. This is after the flood came down. They're in the ark. And God made a wind. A wind. A wind? A ruach? Where do we see wind show up first in the Bible? Genesis 1, verse 2. There was tohu vavohu. There was chaos. And the wind of God, the Spirit of God, the ruach of God was hovering over the waters. What do we have here? We have chaos in the flood. The great abyss. Right here. And what do we have? We have the ruach of God blown over the earth, and the waters subsided. Genesis 8:1 is the pivot point. Genesis 8:1 is the first time we see God recreating in the Bible, and we will see God recreate again and again and again, His Spirit over the waters. See what happens. Verse 2. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The windows of the heavens, the rakia, was shut. The rain from the heavens was restrained. He's the water tamer. And the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And in the 7th month of the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest. Rest on the 7th month. Interesting. Rest on the 7th month. Kind of sounds familiar. Rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, 10 and 7. The tops of the mountains were seen. The same exact word from Genesis 1:9, where the land appeared. Remember I said, I wouldn't have written it like that. I would have said the land rose above the waters, but the writer of Genesis wanted us to connect the creation story with the flood story. And here, the waters are subsiding, and here the land appears. Later on, God's going to call the humans and the animals to exit the ark, and he tells them to be fruitful and multiply. The same blessing he gave in the creation story. Be fruitful and multiply. God is recreating in this moment. There's so much we can learn from the flood story, but one thing we can point out is that the flood story is a story of recreation. We see it again, we pointed out before, of the exiting from Egypt, the Exodus, as they cross between the divided sea. It's day 2, dividing the waters on dry ground, and the dry ground represents salvation. Here, the dry ground represents new life, where there was chaos, where they couldn't live on the boat forever. They needed land to be able to be fruitful and multiply. The promise of new life from the day 3 land. And I don't think I'm going too far. You might think I'm crazy for this, to take it a little step further, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Watch out. But day 3, he creates land that is so important for life and abundance. Land that when land shows up in the flood story, he can say, be fruitful and multiply. The promise of new life is in the idea of the land appearing on day 3. And what do we celebrate a week from today is the promise of new life from the 3rd day. I believe that there were hints at the very beginning of creation that Jesus would rise again, and that would be a promise that God is making all things new. And we look back at Jesus' resurrection, and we say he brought us life and fruitfulness. And we look forward to the day when God will recreate again in an ultimate way the promise of new creation, that he is going to make all things new. I guess we'll just stop at that. I think that's enough for one day. Father God, we worship you and we praise you.